Okay, this is the sexy move. R, U, R prime, U prime. The reason it's called a sexy move is because, well, like, look at this. Oh yeah, that's sexy. TPS stands for turns per second, so it measures how fast you're turning. How to calculate turns per second is simply turn the per into a divide and just do your number of turns divided by seconds, or how long it took you to do those turns. All right, so here's a timer and here is a soon. So I'm gonna see how fast I can do this soon. All right, so 0.59 seconds and soon is 7 moves long. So here's the calculation for turns per second. Now keep in mind that just because you can turn fast does not mean you have a high TPS or turns per second during your solves. So if you do a solve like this, you can see I'm turning really fast, but I'm also pausing. So I have really high TPS when I'm turning, but when I'm not turning, of course, my turns per second is 0. So in that case, it would actually be better off for me to turn slower and have no pauses instead. So something more like this. The algorithm that solves this OLL case is called soon, or more correctly pronounced soon. But please just call it soon. So I have no idea why this algorithm has a special name and most algorithms don't. Maybe it's just because this one can be done really, really fast, like this. So actually when you've made the cross on top, then all of these OLLs have a name no matter how the corners are twisted, but the other names are just less interesting than soon. So this one looks just like soon where there's one corner up, and this one's called anti-soon. This one is called pi because if you follow the corner stickers, you can kind of draw a pi on this. So this one is U, and these two corner stickers point this way. I guess this is a U? I don't know. This one is called T. This one is called L because if you extend the corner stickers, you could make an L like that. Or it's called bow tie because it looks like a bow tie. And lastly, this one's called H. 2gen just means you turn 2 layers, for example, like R and U. So like soon, or this algorithm. So these ones tend to be really fast because it's really easy to just turn 2 layers at once. And then we also have 3gen, meaning turning 3 layers, but which 3 layers specifically is not specified, which is why we don't really use the term 3gen very often. But 2gen pretty much always just means R and U. So the gen part in 2gen stands for generator, and I don't know exactly what that means. It has something to do with some complicated math stuff, but all you need to know is that 2gen stuff is really nice for one hand, so like this. So here we have 5 solves, and let's take the average. So in cubing, what we do for an average is remove the best time, remove the worst time, and then take the mean of the last 3. So you might be thinking, okay, in cubing, we just have a different meaning for the word average, but that's not actually true. So something interesting about the word average is if you think it means to add up all of the times and then divide by the total number, that's actually not what the word average means at all. That is what the word mean means. And that's always been the definition of the word mean, to add them all up and divide by the total number. The word average actually just means a number that you think is representative of the whole, but you can do this in multiple formats. For example, in statistics, there's the mode, which means the number that shows up the most often. And then there's also the median, which is the number that shows up in the middle if you organize them from smallest to biggest. And then there's also mean, which I talked about. So the definition of the word average can actually change just depending on what you want it to be used for. So even though we use average in cubing differently the way that we normally use it for other purposes, we actually didn't change the meaning of the word average. Sledgehammer is another way to insert a corner edge pair into your first 2 layers. So normally we insert them like this, R, U prime, R prime. But for some cases it can be better to use sledgehammer. So you can see in this case we ended up with a line on top. Instead we do a sledgehammer which goes like this, R prime, F, R, F prime. Then we can get a cross on top. So sometimes it's better to insert normally, sometimes it's better to use the sledgehammer, and it just depends on the case. And look, you can even get an OLL skip. AUF stands for adjust U face. So once you do your PLL algorithm and you solve the cube, it's not actually solved yet. You have to do one more move, and that solves it. This is because the blocks that you normally would want to line up to solve it, if you always lined them up and then solved it from here, you'd have to rotate the entire cube. So sometimes we just move it over and then solve it, and then do one more move at the end to finish it off, which saves some time. So CFOP, or pronounced CFOP, is the most popular method among speedcubers, and so you probably know it. It's just, so first what you do is just solve the cross, like this, so across, and then you solve the first two layers, and then you do what's called OLL, which orients the last layer, and then you do PLL, which permutes the pieces, or moves them around, and that solves the cube. So Roux is a really good and intuitive speedcubing method. It doesn't have a lot of algorithms, and in terms of your potential for being fast with Roux, it's debatably about the same level as CFOP. So a quick overview, not a tutorial. If you want a tutorial, you can check the description. But first what you do is you build a block like this on the left. Then next you do the same thing on the right, so it looks really similar to having completed F2L, except you don't have this part in the middle. Then next what you do is you solve all of the top layer corners. So this next part's really cool. You just solve the last 6 edges using M and U moves. So people who actually solve with Roux would do that way faster than I did, but you can see how it kind of looks cool there. So when you solve with CFOP, you have to do some cube rotations because of how F2L pairs get inserted. But then the idea of why you have to rotate at all has to do with good and bad edges. So I'm not going to go too far into the theory of this, but basically if you turn all of the bad edges into good edges before your solve starts, then you'll never have to rotate. So far nobody has achieved results with ZZ as good as with Roux or CFOP, but it is a pretty good method for one hand since you don't really have to rotate. And anyway, I'm just going to show an overview of the steps now. So the first thing you do is some moves that turns all the bad edges into good edges. All right, and then you make this line here at the bottom. And after this, your solve can be done entirely using only U moves, R moves, and L moves. So I'm not that good with ZZ, but I'm just going to show how it doesn't require any rotations. So I made this thing in here without rotating so far. All right, then this. So that wasn't the best solution because I don't use ZZ, but that did require no rotations. And then of course now we just have last layer, which doesn't require rotations anyway. So this one's a bit confusing. COLL stands for corners, and then OLL, which is orientation of the last layer. So what that means is you solve all of the corners while also doing OLL. So let's take a look at this example where maybe your normal algorithm to solve OLL will result in a case that does not have all the corners solved, and having all the corners solved typically results in a really good PLL case. So instead you can do a different algorithm, and that results in all of the corners solved. Now OLLCP stands for, well, OLL, so orientation of the last layer, plus corner permutation. So corner permutation just basically means to move all the corners to the right spot. And if they're all oriented after OLL, then wouldn't that also make them solved? So yes, COLL and OLLCP actually mean the exact same thing if you only look at what each word means. But for some reason, cubers have just accepted these names to mean two different things. So what I showed earlier, COLL, only applies to when the cross on top is already made. So what OLLCP does is the same thing as COLL, but it can be applied to any OLL case without the cross on top. So here's an example of an OLLCP. And that solves all the corners. So we have a term in cubing called metrics, and metrics measure how many moves it takes to do a certain thing. So I'm sure the first time we all picked up a cube and you saw this move, some people would consider this one move because you only need one action in order to complete it. But some people would consider this two moves because you actually have to move the outer layers twice in order to complete this move. So instead of having an argument about which one is correct, we have different metrics for this. So if you consider this move to be one move, this is called a slice move, and we have what's called STM, or slice turn metric. So for example, this algorithm, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that's 7 moves. But since I used 4 slice moves, you might say each of those slice moves are actually 2 moves. So in total, this algorithm would have been 11 moves. Well, if you think that way, then what you're thinking about is called HTM, or half turn metric. So half turn metric just means when you turn the outer layers and all those count as one move. So if you turn an inner layer, that's the equivalent of turning each of the opposite outer layers once. So we also have more specific ones, which I'll go over briefly. Quarter turn metric means this is one move, and then if you do it again, that's two moves. But in half turn metric, this half of a whole 360-degree turn is just one move, or any amount of this is just one move. But in quarter turn metric, this is one and this is two. Now in ETM, or execution turn metric, everything you do counts as a move. So if you do this, that's two moves. But if you do this, that's one move because you only did one thing, a double flick, compared to flicking twice. And cube rotations also count as turns in ETM. Alright, so that's it for this video, and if you want to see more speed cubing tutorials, you can click any of these links on the screen. Of course, if you have a question or a video suggestion or anything, you can leave a comment. I hope you enjoyed it. See you all next time.